welcome to my toilet. Nice, isn't it? I mean, it's pretty standard really. It's got a seat, a flush. And because it's in my flat, you don't have to worry about what gender you are when you use it. I know what you're thinking. Typical trans person, always talking about toilets. It's not my fault. I just want to be able to pee. But somehow wanting to do that in a public toilet has escalated into a national debate about protecting women and what makes somebody male or female. The thing is, this isn't the first time this has happened. Public toilets have always been sites where cultural anxieties about social change play out. It might be worth remembering this when those discussions about who should or shouldn't be in a toilet come up. In other words, let's reframe how we think about toilets and try not to get drawn into debating heteropatriarchy on its terms and in its own language. So what is the deal with public toilets? They're one of the few public spaces where people still expect to be gender segregated, but this has not always been the case. Prior to about the 1820s, there were no public toilets, just free-for-all public latrines. Then cities grew and public toilets were needed, but they were only constructed for men. Why? Because women don't wander around in public space needing to pee. They did it at home. But in not providing public toilets for women, their ability to be in public space was further restricted. So as a woman, you could go out and not go, or not go out and go at home. It wasn't until after the 1860s that women's public toilets began to appear, and not without opposition. People objected on the grounds that 1. Women's public toilets would sanction women's presence in public space, which was still not a place women were meant to be. 2. Middle-class people were scared that women's public toilets would allow middle-class women to mix with working-class women, and this would corrupt them. 3. People thought the idea of a women's public toilet was so ridiculous, no woman would want to use it, and worse, if they did, they would effectively make themselves public, making the toilets basically a brothel. All this happened around the same time that scientific ideas about men and women having fixed biological differences really started to take hold. This in turn was used to further cement the division of public and private spheres and to justify women's confinement to the private. But once women's public toilets were established, they began to be rigidly defined and policed. What started as an effort to bar women from men's privileged spaces gradually became more about enforcing separate spaces for the privacy or protection of women. Usually, a single gender space is assumed to be safe or private because it is not sexualised, an idea that rests not only on some very heteronormative assumptions, but also on the very same patriarchal discourses of male sexuality and female vulnerability that we use to exclude women from the public sphere in the first place. Historically, public toilets have been segregated in other ways as well. For example, in apartheid South Africa and pre-civil rights America, toilets were segregated by race. This might seem unacceptably racist to us now, but during the 1950s and 60s in the US, when public and workplace toilets were being desegregated, there were protests and even strikes against the move. White people who opposed civil rights tried to argue that mixed toilets would be unsafe and segregation was needed to protect people, in this case, white people. But we end up with our two-toilet, two-gender system, and that works for everyone, right? What about the accessible toilets that disabled people later lobbied for? How come they aren't segregated by gender? Does this perhaps suggest other bodily differences or capacities might override gender as the most salient factor in deciding where you get to pee? Surely not. Are disabled people outside binary gender? Well, yes, in the sense that they reveal how binary gender is built on some very ableist ideas about the look and function of gender-normative bodies. Throughout time, it seems like groups of people with more power stir up fears about safety in order to protect their access to spaces. But if this isn't really the issue, then what is? We could steal an idea from anthropologist Mary Douglas and say it's about purity and danger. Toilets, maybe particularly public toilets, are places that literally deal with dirt. They play host to that awkward moment when bodily boundaries are breached and what was inside comes out. They're places where matter is out of place and as such, the threat of pollution is high. Bodies that symbolically threaten purity, that blur boundaries or represent matter out of place, be they working class women's bodies in middle class women's toilet space, black bodies in the segregation era US, or to an extent, bodies that are disabled by the architecture of public toilets, have to be excluded in order to maintain social order. In this way, what trans bodies in a gender-segregated space threaten to contaminate is a sort of gender purity, the presumption of a clean, neat division of discrete categories of gender. Trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming bodies crack the facade of binary gender, revealing the deeply anxiety-inducing, liminal, indeterminate, in-between space that everybody is busy pretending doesn't exist. Oh look, it's just men and women, really? Okay. So what does it mean that trans folks have to spend a lot of time talking about toilets? I think on one level it further associates us with filth, with pollution, with plumbing, and while part of me thinks it's better to embrace the filth rather than trying to convince people we're clean, which would inevitably consign some other group of people to being filth, there are perhaps other concerns. The intense focus on the policing of gender in toilet spaces distracts us from thinking about how the space outside toilets is equally rigidly gendered and policed. We've almost been convinced that toilets are the problem, when in fact we are constrained by expectations of gender in almost every space. In recent years, we have seen the rise of campaigns to de-gender toilets, to make them all gender or gender neutral. But however well-meaning and inclusive this might be, why is it still about gender when this was the problem in the first place? So what I think I'm trying to say is that we need both toilet spaces that are toilet spaces and not gender spaces, and the full destruction of compulsory binary gender. Okay, thank you. You can get out now.